Welcome in to the Saturday edition of the Fun Astrology and Merriman Market Analyst Financial Podcast. I'm Thomas Miller. We're going to tackle the newsletter for the week beginning June 3rd here. What a monumental week it has been. We have some good astrology wrapping up the week in this newsletter, and then we'll talk about the biggest news story, of course, of the week. This is the free weekly newsletter that is published and given here with permission from Ray Merriman, MMAcycles.com, up at the top if you'd like to follow along. The first news story here is from the Wall Street Journal, published on Friday. A late afternoon rally lifted the Dow Jones Industrials and S&P 500 to daily gains after the Friday morning release of the Fed's preferred inflation gauge. The Personal Consumption Expenditures, or PCE, price index rose 2.7% in April from a year ago, in line with economists' expectations. And then from also Friday on CNBC.com, Ether soared 27% in May after the SEC cleared a path for spot Ether ETFs. Sounds like we should have all had some Ether. Now let's jump into Ray's comments for this week. He says last week's market behavior reflected the dualistic nature of Gemini. As the NASDAQ went up, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell. When the NASDAQ fell, the Dow Jones Industrial Average went up. It was a similar tale of related markets going in opposite directions with gold and silver. Usually, markets in the same sector move in the same direction, but that may not be the case when the Sun, Venus, and Jupiter are all in the mutable sign of Gemini, and even more so when the Moon also travels through the mutable and dualistic sign of Pisces, which was the case on Thursday and Friday. Most of the world's stock indices followed a path outlined by our solar-lunar studies on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. That is, important highs formed under the Sagittarius full moon of May 23rd. The S&P, for instance, made its all-time high then. Several indices then made a secondary high last week, May 28th, when the moon was in Aquarius. The NASDAQ, for instance, made its all-time high then. Both of these lunar signs, with the Sun and Gemini, have a correlation to isolated highs then with greater than average historical frequency. Most markets then dropped to the low of the week on Friday with the quarter moon in Pisces. Then by the end of the day, they rallied. The danger is that this type of pattern occurring this late in a 4-year cycle is often seen when longer-term cycles are topping out. Much will depend now on how high a rally due this week will go. If the market is to remain bullish, then global stock indices need to rally to new yearly highs soon. If they start to fall again and take out the lows of the past week before making new highs, that could be a sign of trouble. The new moon in Gemini is due this week and is normally bullish. Thus, if the markets are not bullish when they are expected to be bullish by these studies, that means they are probably turning bearish. Gold and silver were both down last week. Both made long-term highs on May 20th, which was right on MMA's 3-star critical reversal date. For gold, it was an all-time high. For silver, it was the highest level in over 12 years. Silver retested this high on Wednesday, May 29th, just as the solar-lunar studies suggested as a high possibility. But by Friday, both gold and silver were making new weekly lows, again as the solar-lunar studies had suggested. However, both are in the later phase of their primary cycle, so the pressure is to see lower prices, perhaps into the Sun-Neptune retrograde period of June 28th to July 2nd. Unless they can first take out their highs of the past 2 weeks. Bitcoin continues to consolidate near its new all-time high as it seems to be tracing out a bullish and inverse head and shoulders chart pattern. Ethereum, however, is now nearing its yearly high, as new ETFs on the crypto are ready to be offered for public trading. In the meantime, crude oil continues to struggle with slightly higher highs followed by slightly lower lows over the past month. Maybe it too is waiting for the Saturn and Neptune retrogrades to break out one way or the other. Now the short-term Geocosmics. And obviously this week was a major, massive news story in the history of the United States. Ray covers it in these next paragraphs. Typically, we don't do politically oriented material on fun astrology. However, Ray does weave some astrology in here. If you were just here for the financial information, that is now complete for this week. If you'd like to hear his thoughts about the trial's outcome, listen on. The first article is from Fox News on Friday. Following those remarks, reporters in the room asked Biden again about the Trump verdict. Mr. President, can you tell us, sir, Donald Trump refers to himself as a political prisoner and blames you directly. What is your response to that? One reporter asked Biden as he was walking away. Biden then turned around and cracked a grin at the media before heading out of the room. And this is from a post that appeared on Twitter, or X, on Friday, May 31st. She, Hillary Clinton, shouldn't be allowed to run. If she wins, it would create an unprecedented constitutional crisis. In that situation, we could very well have a sitting president under felony indictment and ultimately a criminal trial. It would grind government to a halt. Those were comments from Donald Trump in 2016 from an article entitled Accountable GOP, Republicans Against Trump. Now, Ray's comments, he says you would think that transiting Jupiter entering Donald Trump's Gemini sign would bring him good news. But for the second time this year, juries in New York courts found him guilty of charges. For Democrats, this is a case of do the crime, pay the time, and no one is above the law. For Republicans who support Donald Trump, this entire trial was rigged and corrupt, something you would expect to see in a communist country or a banana republic. The vast divergence in response is yet another characteristic of Gemini. Where is the middle when the noise is so overwhelmingly loud on the extremes? Question mark. From the geocosmic perspective, the Trump verdict of this week is very interesting. First, the trial took place as Mars transited over Chiron and the powerful eclipse point of April 8th. That eclipse path went right over the heartland of the United States. In olden times, total eclipses over a region was thought to portend the death or defeat of the leader. In this case, one has to wonder, which leader, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? The trial of President Biden's son is expected to start next week. Will the tables turn, which is a characteristic associated with Gemini and its ruler Mercury? Second, transiting Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini, so maybe the good fortune and luck associated with Jupiter on one's natal sun, as in the case of Donald Trump, is not so strong when it's in detriment. I also find the verdict this week correlates well with the U.S. chart of July 2nd, 1776, about 11:50 a.m., as used in your annual 2024 forecast book. This places Saturn of rules rising in the sign of Libra, laws and courts. As MMA editor Beth Woody wrote this week, quoting, "I wish I had $100 each time I hear that phrase, rule of law, in the news now. These brilliant people in interviews keep saying how the rule of law is America's strength. And each time I hear this, I realize this is the energy of the USA's chart. Saturn in Libra in the first house. It's all being tested now." End quote. It's also interesting that Jupiter and the other Gemini planets are now entering the 9th house of legal judgments in that United States chart. Shorter term, we find an interesting arrangement of planets in the heavens this week, starting with Saturn in mid-Pisces. Then we find 9 of the 10 celestial bodies lining up all in a row through the Sun and Venus in Gemini, and they are all less than 90 degrees apart. With the Sun, Venus, and Jupiter to be joined by Mercury on Monday, so close to one another in an air sign, this would normally augur a period of optimism and cheer. It's probably true for Democrats last week. But that could reverse and become a period of cheer for Republicans by the end of the next week. both due to the media attention on the court cases involving the nation's former and current president. So you're going to hear a lot about a two-tiered justice system in the days ahead, but don't be surprised. This is the season of Gemini, the twins, with two heads scheming in opposite directions. This is not a season to take victory laps. With Gemini, emotions and trends can reverse quickly. However, all this energy associated with Jupiter and Venus in an air sign may offer a short-term boost to the financial markets. So have fun and enjoy it while it lasts. But keep your ears peeled for the sound of that gong referred to last week. And that concludes this week's newsletter. If you'd like to check out the announcements in the physical newsletter from the website, they have information in there about this new app, this new trading app that they've come out with at MMA. It's the first of the announcements in this week's column. Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of the weekend. I'll be back for Level Up on Sunday night and, of course, back for a full week of podcasts starting on Monday. Thanks for listening.